It begins with a knife, a single silver flash across the screen, followed by a scream that seems to echo forever. This is how America met Psycho, a film that promised horror but delivered something far more disturbing. It wasn't just a story about a killer in a motel. It was a story about the secret fears inside every polite, ordinary life. And in 1960, that idea terrified people more than the murders themselves. Alfred Hitchcock was already famous when he made Psycho. He was the master of suspense, the man who made people afraid of heights, strangers, and windows. But this time, he wanted to do something different. He wanted to scare people in a way they'd never forget. The studios didn't want it. They said the story, a cheap, pulpy novel about murder, voyeurism, and madness, was beneath him. Hitchcock disagreed. He bought the rights in secret, paid for the movie himself, and shot it in black and white to make it look almost documentary-like. That's how Psycho began, as an experiment nobody believed in. Marion Crane, a real estate secretary in Phoenix, steals $40,000 in cash from her employer after hearing her boyfriend Sam Loomis complain that his debts are delaying their marriage. She sets off to drive to Sam's home in the town of Fairvale, California, switching cars in Bakersfield after an encounter with a suspicious policeman. A heavy rainstorm forces Marion to stop at the secluded Bates Motel just a few miles from Fairvale. Norman Bates, the proprietor, whose Second Empire-style house overlooks the motel, registers Marion, who uses an alias, and invites her to dinner with him in the motel's office. When Norman returns to his house to retrieve the food, Marion overhears him arguing with his mother about his desire to dine with Marion. After he returns, he discusses his hobby as a taxidermist, his mother's illness, and how people have a private trap they want to escape. When Marion suggests that Norman should have his mother institutionalized, he becomes greatly offended and insists that she's harmless. Marion decides to drive back to Phoenix in the morning to return the stolen money. As she showers, a shadowy figure enters the bathroom with a kitchen knife and stabs her to death. Shortly afterward, Norman is heard horrified at his mother's actions and rushes back to find Marion dead. He hurriedly cleans up the murder scene and places Marion's body, her belongings, and, unbeknownst to him, the hidden cash in her car before sinking the vehicle in a swamp. Marion's sister Lila arrives in Fairvale a week later, tells Sam about the theft, and demands information about Marion's whereabouts. He denies knowing anything about Marion's disappearance. A private investigator named Arbogast approaches them, stating that he has been hired to retrieve the money. He stops in at the Bates Motel and questions Norman, whose nervous conduct, stuttering, and inconsistent answers arouse his suspicion. Arbogast examines the guest register and discovers from some handwriting in it that Marion spent a night in the motel. When Arbogast infers from things Norman says that Marion had spoken to his mother, Arbogast asks to speak to her, but Norman refuses to allow it. Arbogast leaves, finds a payphone, and calls Lila to tell her of his suspicions and that he will go back to the motel, speak to Norman's mother, and rejoin Lila in town later. When Arbogast returns and enters the Bates house to search for Norman's mother, a shadowy figure at the top of the stairs ambushes him and slashes him around the head. He tumbles down the stairs as the figure stabs him repeatedly. When Sam and Lila do not hear back from Arbogast, Sam goes to the motel to look for him. Sam spots a silhouette in the house who he assumes is Norman's mother, who is unresponsive to Sam's calls. Lila and Sam alert the local sheriff, Al Chambers, who tells them Norman's mother died in a murder-suicide by strychnine poisoning 10 years before. Chambers suggests that Arbogast lied to Sam and Lila so he could pursue Marion and the money. Convinced that something happened to Arbogast, Lila and Sam drive to the motel and check in. Sam distracts Norman in the office while Lila sneaks into the Bates house. Suspicious, Norman knocks Sam out. As Norman heads to the house, Lila hides in the fruit cellar, where she discovers the mummified body of Norman's mother. Lila screams in horror, and Norman, wearing women's clothes and a wig, enters the cellar and attempts to attack her, only to be subdued by a recovered Sam. At the police station, a psychiatrist explains to Lila, Sam and Chambers, that Norman killed his mother and her lover out of jealousy. Unable to bear the guilt, he stole his mother's corpse and treated it as if she were still alive, then recreated his mother as an alternate personality, as jealous and possessive toward Norman as he felt about his mother. Whenever Norman was attracted to a woman, Mother would take over. Under the mother personality, Norman killed 2 women before he killed Marion and Arbogast. The psychiatrist concludes that Mother has now completely submerged Norman's personality. Norman sits in a jail cell and hears his mother's voice stating the murders were his doing. Meanwhile, Marion's car, which contains her remains and the stolen money, is pulled from the swamp. The scene was so intense that some countries banned it entirely. Ireland and South Africa called it indecent. Singapore refused to screen it for a decade. And even in Britain, the censors insisted no one under 16 could see it. The reason? It made the audience feel complicit. Hitchcock didn't just show violence. He turned the camera into an accomplice. He made the viewer watch, powerless, unable to look away. For 1960, that was beyond shocking. It was dangerous. And then came the sound, that shrieking metallic violin score by Bernard Herrmann. It cut through people's nerves like a blade, turning the shower scene into pure psychological chaos. When critics called it obscene, Hitchcock just smiled. He said, "It's only a movie," but everyone knew it was something more. It was a mirror held up to the moral panic of its time, a world that pretended to be perfect, terrified of what hid behind the curtain. In America, Psycho clashed directly with the production code, Hollywood's long-standing rule book for what could and couldn't be shown. Nudity, forbidden. Toilets, never. Even the suggestion of sex or murder had to be cloaked in shadows. Hitchcock ignored all of it. He showed Marion in her underwear, lovers in a cheap hotel room, a toilet flushing, blood swirling down the drain. Small details, but together, they felt like an assault on 1950s morality. Theaters in Chicago and Boston threatened to boycott it. Church groups called it a perversion of cinema, and the Catholic Legion of Decency tried to have it pulled entirely. Hitchcock's response was genius. He turned censorship into marketing. He banned late entry to screenings. No one was allowed into the theater after the movie began. Posters warned audiences to keep quiet about the ending. Lines stretched around the block. People fainted. Some vomited. Nurses were stationed in lobbies just in case. And when the critics who hated it at first realized what he'd done, it was too late. The public had already crowned Psycho a phenomenon. Beneath all the screams, though, was something deeper, something that made Psycho timeless. Norman Bates wasn't a monster in the usual sense. He was polite, shy, broken. He looked like someone you might know. That's what made him terrifying. Hitchcock had created one of cinema's first truly psychological killers. Not a villain from outside, but a reflection of everything we try to hide. And at the center of it all was Anthony Perkins, whose performance was so eerie and so tender that it destroyed his career and immortalized him at the same time. Opposite him, Janet Leigh became the face of cinematic fear, the woman who screamed and changed film forever. After Psycho, nothing was the same. The film earned massive profits despite its small budget. It opened the door for filmmakers like Brian De Palma, David Lynch, and Martin Scorsese to explore darker subjects. But more importantly, it shattered Hollywood's censorship code. It proved that audiences were ready, or maybe always had been, for stories that treated violence, guilt, and desire as part of the human condition. Today, the shower scene has been studied frame by frame, analyzed by scholars, and recreated in endless homages. But no imitation ever captures the feeling people had in 1960, when the screen itself seemed to bleed, and nobody knew what was safe anymore. The movie didn't just show death, it showed fear itself, the kind that doesn't end when the lights come up. In the decades that followed, Psycho became legend. Hitchcock became the face of modern suspense. The film inspired sequels, remakes, and entire genres. But its real legacy isn't in the stabbings or the screams. It's in the quiet moments. The way Norman tilts his head, the way Marion's eye stares blankly after her death, the way we, the audience, realize we've been watching our own reflection all along. That's what made Psycho so dangerous. Not that it showed too much, but that it showed us. The polite faces, the locked doors, the fragile line between control and chaos. For a world raised on clean stories and moral endings, it was too much truth, too fast. And yet, it's still here, still sharp, still whispering that same question. What if the real horror isn't the killer in the shadows, but the thoughts we try hardest not to see?